How long are you going to keep pretending everything is fine? Because I know what's actually happening. You're smart, you're capable, you genuinely care about getting this right, and yet there's that number sitting in your account or on that statement or in the back of your mind that have not let yourself look at in weeks, maybe months, and every time someone around you talks about their savings or holiday plans or their new car, you smile and nod, and something inside you quietly dies a little. That feeling, the mix of shame and exhaustion and low-key rage at yourself, that's what we are talking about today. And here's what I need you to know before we go any further. That feeling is not proof that you are a failure. It's actually proof that your brain is doing exactly what it was wired to do. And no one ever told you that. No budget app told you that. No financial influencer telling you to just stop buying coffee told you that. So by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why you feel this way, why it has almost nothing to do with how smart or disciplined you are, and what to actually do about it. Because this ends today, let's get into. Coming up in this video, three things. Number one, why the people around you make you feel judged and how to make that stop. Number two, why you know exactly what to do with money and still can't make yourself to do it, and why that's not your fault. And number three, why you keep falling into the same patterns over and over again, and the exact thing that finally breaks the cycle. Let's get into it. Before any strategy makes sense, before any budget or debt payoff plan actually works, you need to understand one thing first. The difference between two feelings that seems almost identical, but aren't. Guilt and shame. Here's the easiest way to explain it. You burned dinner once, you thought, I got the timing wrong. That is guilt. It made you set a timer next time. It pointed at the behavior and said, do that differently. Now imagine that every time dinner burned, instead of thinking I got it wrong, you thought, I'm a terrible person who cannot cook and never will. Would you ever cook again? No. You would avoid the kitchen entirely. Because why walk into a room that makes you feel like a fundamentally broken human being? That's shame. And that's exactly what's happening every time you look at your bank account and feel that wave. That heavy, suffocating wave of I'm a failure. And here's what matters. Guilt pushes you to fix things. Shame pushes you to escape. To close the app, to not open the statement, to tell yourself you will deal with it later. And later never comes. Studies shows that shame, more than any other negative emotion around money, predicts avoidance of financial information, disengagement, and worsening hardship over time. Because guilt says I did something bad. Shame says I am something bad. So if you know what you should be doing and still cannot make yourself to do it, that is why. You have not been failing at budgeting. You have been escaping shame. That's a completely different problem, which means it has a completely different solution. But shame about money does not just appear out of nowhere. It was put there. And most of the time, it was put there long before you ever had a credit card. Where financial shame actually comes from. Think about the first time you ever heard the word money at home. Not a formal conversation, just the energy in the room when it came up. The way your parents' faces changed. The tension at the dinner table when a bill arrived. The silence. The we can't afford that delivered in a tone that means do not ask again. The whispered arguments behind closed doors that you were not supposed to hear but absolutely did. Nobody sat you down and said, here's what money means about your worth as a person. They didn't have to. You absorbed it. The way kids absorb everything quietly, completely, and without a filter to separate information from identity. And that's the thing about money shame. It's learned. Nobody's born feeling like a failure because of a bank balance. That feeling was taught, not always intentionally, not always loudly, but it was taught. Maybe it was a phrase you heard over and over. Money does not grow on trees. We are not made of money. People like us don't get to have things like that. Statements that seem like practical reminders at the time, but what you actually heard, what you actually stored, was something closer to there is something about who we are that puts certain things out of reach. And if you ever end up struggling with money, that says something about you. Maybe it was the silence. A lot of families never discussed money at all, and silence has its own message. When something is never talked about, a child's brain does not conclude, this must not be important. It concludes, this must be too dangerous, too shameful, or too loaded to even say out loud. So you grew up understanding at a level beneath conscious thought that money was something to feel secretive about, something to hide, something that if others knew the reality of your situation would change how they saw you. Or maybe it was more direct than that. A moment, a specific thing someone said, a parent, a teacher, a relative, that seemed offhand to them but landed in you like a verdict. One sentence at a dinner table that quietly shaped your entire relationship with money for the next 20 years. Here is what all of those experiences have in common. They didn't just teach you facts about money. They taught you what money means, what it says about you, what it says about your family, what it says about your worth, your intelligence, your discipline, your future. And that meaning, that story got wired in deep long before your first job, long before your first credit card, long before you made a single financial decision as an adult. So here's what actually happens when you check your bank balance today and feel that wave of shame. You're not just reacting to a number, you're triggering a feeling that was already installed. The debt didn't create the shame was already there waiting. The number just woke it up, which is why it feels so personal, which is why it feels so heavy, which is why it does not respond to logic the way it should. Because it was never really about the number, it was about what the number means, and that meaning was decided for you before you ever had a say in it. And that's the part that should actually make you feel something shift right now. Because if the shame was assigned to you, if it came from outside, from messages you received before you were old enough to question them, then you didn't create it. You inherited it. You were handed a story about who you are with money before you ever had the chance to write your own. Now, you might be sitting with something right now that sounds like, okay, fine. The shame came from somewhere outside of me, but it still feels like mine. It still feels like it's just me. Why does it feel so personal if it didn't start with me? Because shame is uniquely personal by design. It does not attach to behavior, it attaches to identity. It doesn't say you did something bad, it says you are something bad. But here's what that also means. If it attached to your identity, it can be detached from your identity too. And your brain has been working overtime to make sure that never has to happen. Here's how. The avoidance law. Why your brain is actually trying to help you. So your brain picked up this shame early. It got wired indeed. And then, because your brain is actually incredibly good at its job, it developed a strategy to make sure you never had to feel that shame anymore. Then absolutely necessary. The strategy is avoidance. And before you call that a character flaw, I need you to understand something. Avoidance is not a weakness. It's not laziness. It's not a proof that you don't care enough or that you're not trying hard enough. Avoidance is your brain's protection mechanism firing exactly the way it was designed to fire. Your brain detected a threat, the shame that comes with looking at your finances, and it did what brains do with threats. It found the fastest exit. Here's the part that's actually kind of fascinating. Your brain does not distinguish between a physical threat and an emotional one. The system that would fire if you were about to walk into a dangerous situation, the same threat response fires when you think about opening your banking app. Because to your nervous system, they feel the same. The shame that's attached to your financial identity feels like danger, and the brain's job, above everything else, is to keep you away from danger. So it keeps you away. You don't open the app, you don't check the balance, you put the statement in a drawer. You tell yourself you will deal with it on the weekend. And then the weekend comes and suddenly there are 100 other things that feel more urgent. That's not procrastination, that's protection. And here's the cruel part. It works. In the short term, avoidance actually works. The moment you decide not to look, there's a real, immediate sense of relief. The anxiety drops, the shame retreats. You feel okay again for now, and your brain registers that. It files it away. Avoidance equals relief. So next time the threat shows up, it reaches for the same tool because the last time it used it, it worked. Except, and this is where the whole thing turns on you. The problem does not disappear when you look away. The balance keeps growing. The interest keeps compounding. The gap between where you are and where you want to be keeps widening. And when you eventually do catch a glimpse of it, a notification, a decline card, an offhand comment from someone, the number is bigger than it was before. Which means the shame is bigger, which means the threat feels even more dangerous, which means the avoidance has to work even harder to protect you from it. This is the loop. Shame triggers avoidance. Avoidance provides temporary relief. The problem grows. The problem creates more shame. More shame triggers more avoidance. The loop tightens, and every cycle through it, the wall gets a little higher and the idea of facing it gets a little more impossible. And this right here is why willpower does not fix it. This is why every time you have tried to white knuckle your way into opening the app or sitting down with the numbers, it hasn't stuck. Because willpower is a cognitive tool. It lives in the thinking part of your brain. And this loop isn't running in the thinking part of your brain. It's running in the part that decides what's a threat and what's safe. You cannot think your way out of the threat response. You have to address it at the level it's actually operating. Think back to the burnt dinner. Your brain isn't broken. It's just a smoke alarm that's been set too sensitive. And you have been trying to cook in a fireproof suit, more discipline, more willpower, more forcing yourself. Instead of just recalibrating the alarm isn't the enemy, it's just responding to the wrong signals. And once you understand that, you stop fighting yourself because you were never the problem. The settings were. So the question becomes, how do you actually recalibrate? How do you get your brain to stop treating your bank account like a burning building? And the answer is genuinely counterintuitive because it's not about becoming more disciplined. It's about becoming more honest with yourself in a very specific way. The self-compassion reframe, the counterintuitive fix. Let me ask you something. Think about someone you genuinely care about, a close friend, a sibling, someone you would do anything for. Now imagine they came to you and said, I have been struggling with money. I have got debt I have not dealt with. I keep avoiding it and I don't know how to stop. I feel like such a failure. What would you say to them? You wouldn't say, well, you should have known better. You wouldn't say honestly, this is just laziness. You wouldn't say, I mean, what did you expect? You would probably pull them close. You would tell them it makes sense that they are struggling. You would remind them that one difficult chapter does not define them. You would help them think through one small next step. You would be kind, genuinely, instinctively kind. Now, is that how you talk to yourself about money? If the answer is no, and for the most people the answer is no, then here's what's actually been happening. You have been trying to shame yourself into action, telling yourself you're bad with money, that you should know better, that other people manage just fine, so what's your excuse? And it feels like accountability. It feels like you're being honest with yourself. It feels like the responsible thing to do. But it's not accountability. It's just more shame. And you already know what shame does. It does not motivate repair. It motivates escape. So every time you have beaten yourself up about your finances, you have not been pushing yourself toward the solution. You have been feeding the exact loop that's been keeping you stuck. This is where self-compassion comes in. And I need to be really clear about what that means. Because the moment most people hear self-compassion, they think it means letting yourself off the hook, giving yourself a free pass, deciding it doesn't matter. That's not what this is. Self-compassion is not the destination, it's the door. It's the thing that makes it neurologically possible to look at the number, open the account, make the call, when shame has been making all of those things feel like walking into a burning building. Here's what the research actually shows. Self-affirmation, reminding yourself of your values, treating yourself with the same basic decency you would extend to someone you love, directly reduces the relationship between financial shame and worsening hardship. Not because it makes the problem disappear, but because it gets your brain out of threat mode long enough to take one action. And one action is all it takes to start breaking the loop. Think about what happens in threat mode. Your entire focus narrows. Your brain is using very available resources to manage the perceived danger. There is nothing left over for problem solving, for planning, for rational decision making. Shame keeps you in that state, and you cannot think clearly, act deliberately, or move forward from inside a threat response. It is physiologically not possible. Self-compassion is what opens the exit, not because the problem becomes easier, but because you become available to deal with it. And here's the thing about self-criticism that nobody says out loud. It feels productive. Beating yourself up feels like you're doing something. It feels like penance. Like if you feel bad enough about it, that somehow balance the scale. But feeling bad about the situation has never once changed the situation. It has only ever made it harder to face. You cannot think your way into action when shame is running the show. You have to feel your way through the door first. And that door opens with one simple shift. Choosing to speak to yourself the way you would speak to someone you actually care about. Not because you deserve a trophy for being in debt. Not because nothing needs to change. But because the version of you that is kind to yourself is the only version of you that's actually capable of changing anything. So the next time the voice shows up, the one that says you're bad with money, you always do this. You should be further along by now. Don't fight it. Don't argue with it. Just ask yourself one question. Would I say this to someone I love who was struggling? And if the answer is no, then it does not get to be the voice in charge anymore. Now, once you have walked through that door, once shame isn't running the show, here is the first practical thing you actually do. And I promise you, it's not what you think. The one small action that breaks the cycle. Everything we have talked about to up this point has been internal. Understanding the shame, where it came from, why your brain responds the way it does, how to stop punishing yourself for it. And that work matters. It's the foundation. But at some point, the internal shift has to become the external action. And this is where most advice gets it completely wrong. Because the standard advice at this stage is make a budget, build a debt payoff plan, track every expenses, set financial goals, And look, none of that is bad advice, but it's the wrong first step. Because when you are coming out of the shame and avoidance cycle, a full financial overhaul does not feel like a plan. It feels like a mountain. And standing at the bottom of a mountain when you are already exhausted does not make you want to climb. It makes you want to sit down and not move. So here's what actually works instead. Research on breaking the financial shame cycle shows that choosing any new course of action, however small, is what begins to interrupt avoidance patterns and restore a sense of agency. Not a complete overhaul, not a perfect plan, any action. The smallest possible action in the right direction is enough to start rewiring your brain's association between money and threat. Because every time you choose to look instead of avoid, you send your nervous system one signal. This is survivable. And that signal compounds. So here's the only framework you need right now. 3 steps, that's it. Step 1. Name one number. Not everything. Not a full audit of every account and every debt and every bill. Just one number. The credit card balance. The account total. One number that you have been avoiding. That's it. You're not solving it today. You're just looking at it. Step 2. Say this out loud or write it down if that feels easier. This is where I am. This is not who I am. Read that again. Where I am, not who I am. Your current financial situation is a set of circumstances. It's not a verdict on your character, your intelligence, or your future. It's a starting point, and every starting point, no matter how uncomfortable, is infinitely more useful than the fog of avoidance. Step 3. Choose one action with a specific time frame that is so small it feels almost embarrassingly easy. Not a plan, one action. This week, maybe it's logging into the account you have not opened in 3 months. Maybe it's writing down the balances on 2 credit cards. Maybe it's Googling one thing you have been too scared to look up. So small that the shame does not have time to mobilize a defense against it. Small enough that your brain can't talk you out of it. Because here is what matters. The size of the action is completely irrelevant. The direction is everything. Every single time you choose to look instead of look away, you're casting a vote of a new identity. One vote does not win an election, but votes accumulate, and slowly, steadily, the evidence starts to stack up. Evidence that you are someone who faces this, someone who looks, someone who chooses differently than they used to. Progress does not require a perfect plan. It requires repeated decision to not look away. And yes, facing it might feel worse for about 90 seconds, but avoiding it feels worse for the rest of your life. And somewhere in you, you already know that. Which exactly you are still here. The identity shift from I'm bad with money to I'm someone who is learning. Here's something that almost nobody talks about when it comes to changing financial behavior. You can do everything right. You can understand the shame, interrupt the avoidance, practice the self-compassion, take the small action. And then life happens. One bad month, an unexpected expense. A moment of stress where the old patterns feels easier than the new ones. And suddenly you're back to avoiding, back to not looking, back to the familiar voice that says, see, you always do this. You never really change. And if the only thing that's shifted in your behavior, without anything deeper shifting underneath it, the voice wins. Because behavior without identity always reverts. Always. The plan falls apart not because you're weak, but because you were trying to act like a different person while still believing you are the same one. This is why the lost piece isn't a strategy, it's a story. Specifically, the story you tell yourself about who you are with money. Right now, a lot of people watching this, that story sounds something like, I'm bad with money. I have been bad with money. I make the same mistakes over and over. I know what should I do and I never do it. That story feels true because you have lived it. Because the evidence seems to support it. But here's the thing about stories. They don't just describe your behavior, they direct it. When your identity is, I'm bad with money, every setback confirms it. Every mistake is proof. Every hard month is just more evidence of something you already believed about yourself. But when the story changes, even slightly, everything that happens next is interpreted differently. Everything that happens next gets interpreted differently. Not I'm trying to be better with money, because that still positions you as someone fundamentally broken who is attempting a repair. But this instead, I'm someone who is learning to make intentional decisions with money. That is an identity. That is something a new behavior can grow from. Something you can return to after a setback without the whole thing collapsing. And here's how the story actually changes. Not through affirmations, not through convincing yourself to something that does not feel real yet, through votes. Every time you take the small action from the lost point, every time you choose to look instead of avoid, every time you name the number, every time you speak to yourself with basic decency instead of contempt, you're casting a vote for a new identity. One vote does not win an election, but votes accumulate, and at some point the evidence on the new side starts to outweigh the evidence on the old side. Not because you forced it, because you built it, one small decision at a time. The old story will come back. That's completely normal. The goal was never to silence it permanently. The goal is to stop accepting it as fact. So here's the pattern interrupt. Every time that old story shows up, I'm bad with money. I should know better. I always do this. Pause and ask yourself one question. Is that a fact, or is that a feeling that got mistaken for a fact? Because shame is not a truth about you. It's an emotion that was mislabeled as a money verdict somewhere along the way. Probably a long time ago. Probably by someone who did not even realize the weight of what they were passing on to you. And you have carried that verdict ever since. Treated it like it was handed down by someone with authority. Like it was final. It was never final, and you were allowed to appeal it. So when does this end? When does the shame stop? Not when the debt is gone. Not when the savings hit a certain number. Not when everything is perfectly sorted. It ends the moment you stop accepting shame's verdict as fact. The moment is available to you right now. Not after the plan. Not after the payoff. Right now. With the decision about what story you are going to tell yourself going forward. You didn't end up here because you're bad with money. You ended up here because you're human, and because nobody ever sat you down and explained what was actually happening inside your head. Now you know, and knowing changes everything, but only if you do something with it. So here's what I want you to do right now. And listen, now that you understand what's actually being going on, the next question most people have is, okay, but why do I still fall off the plan even when I'm feeling good about it? And I made an entire video about exactly that. It's called Why You Can't Stick to a Financial Plan. And it's going to make everything you just learned click into place at a completely different level. It's right there. I will see you there.